Today, I'm making the questionable decision of making some Malört. Someone close to me asked if it was possible to make Malört from scratch, and well, I have an answer. Now, in case you've never had Malört before, or you don't know what it is, I'm just gonna briefly talk about it. This stuff is a liquor that is extremely bitter. It comes from Chicago, and it's got a really medicinal herbal flavor, and some people love it, and a lot of people hate it. Now, like other revolting things such as surströmming, this stuff comes originally from Sweden. Well, sorta. In the 1920s, a Swedish immigrant named Carl Jeppsson introduced this stuff to the city of Chicago. Now, apparently this stuff was marketed as a medicinal tonic as opposed to alcohol, so that it could kind of skirt the prohibition laws at the time. Okay, enough backstory, it's time to actually make this stuff. So to try to figure out how to make Malört, I combed through a lot of online recipes. And actually, there aren't that many to actually comb through. Most of them didn't actually have ingredient amounts, and all of them are in conflict with each other. So I figured, all right, I'm gonna have to experimentally determine how to make this. The only thing that they all seem to agree on is that you can make something that tastes like Malört by soaking dried herbs in a neutral alcohol, like vodka. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm basically gonna experiment with a bunch of different combinations, and I'm gonna use these glass mason jars, which are gonna not really impart much of a flavor on the actual end product. I'm gonna let them soak for a little while, and then I'm gonna taste the end product to see which one kind of closely resembles Malört. Now, the first thing that I'm gonna focus in on is an herb known as wormwood. Now, if you haven't ever had this stuff, it's definitely potent. It even smells potent. I came across at least one person that claims that you can make something that tastes like Malört just by using wormwood alone, although they didn't say the amount and concentration. So to figure this out, I'm just going to fill up one of these little mason jars with some wormwood, and I'm gonna increase the amount in stages to figure out what end product kind of tastes the most similar. So to start, I filled up one mason jar with about 4 grams, which was just a total guess. And then I just filled up the 250 milliliter mason jar or 8-ounce mason jar with a neutral vodka. I just sealed up the mason jar, labeled it, and then went on to the next one. And the next one, I just want to see what happens if I actually double this amount. So I added about 8 grams of wormwood and then repeated the same process. Now lastly, I decided I'm probably gonna also make an extra strength version, which turns out to be about 16 grams of wormwood. I sealed that one up and I labeled it, and these 3 are gonna make a good test to figure out what's the right level of strength I'm gonna need for the Malört. Okay, now with the wormwood concentration underway, it was time to test the effect of the other herbs and whether or not they really even made a difference in making Malört. So to test this, I'm just gonna take the base strength, which was 4 grams of wormwood, and I'm just gonna add some extra herbs to see how much the flavor actually makes a difference. And to choose which herbs I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna go off this recipe that I found off this website, where the ingredient amounts aren't listed. So here's just a total guess. As I mentioned, I'm gonna start with the 4 grams of wormwood, and then I'm gonna add some juniper berries. Now, juniper berries are really good in the flavor of like gin, so I'm gonna add about 2 grams, and then also it was suggested to add some allspice and some Star Anise. So for the allspice, I added about 4 berries, and for the Star Anise, I just added a few little pieces from one Star Anise star. Lastly, they suggest using something I was kind of unfamiliar with, which was elderflower, so I really had no sense of how strong the stuff is, so I kind of just added about 2 grams. Seemed like a good halfway. Again, like I did before, I just filled the rest of it up with vodka. Again, they just sealed that up, labeled it, and moved on. And I just labeled this as like the herbed traditional recipe. We'll see how it tastes. And then lastly, while I was kind of in this experimental mode, I just decided to make my own herb concoction, which was just really based off of my feelings and vibes at the time. So I just got a little mason jar, I filled it with a little bit of juniper berries. I also thought it might be nice to add a little bit of black pepper for some spice. I then added some wintergreen for a little bit of a minty flavor. And then I just kind of eyeballed an amount of wormwood, which looks like it's close to about 4 grams, the same amount that I used in the other stuff. So then, as a total curveball, because I had it, I decided to add a little bit of orange blossom for a nice citrusy flavor that I really love. I again just filled this up with vodka, labeled it as the Flavor Lab brand of Malört, and sealed it up. Now I have all 5 different versions of the Malört tests going underway, and initially I was only gonna let them sit for about a week before testing them. Except for the past few months of my life have been very crazy, so they sat for a few months. The color on all of them deepened dramatically, and really the only way to actually do this is to do a proper taste test. So let's flip over to current day Logan and do a taste test. All right, it's finally tasting day, and I have my Malört that's been sitting for probably a little bit longer than it should have been. So the first thing I want to determine is how much wormwood is actually required for actually making a proper Malört. I'm just gonna look at the 3 Malörts that I made, and I'm gonna compare that to the Malört basically that I purchased from the store. And it's basically just gonna be a taste of the bitterness. So I'm gonna start with the 4 gram strength, which was the base level Malört. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of wormwood in here. I'm just gonna use a spoon and kind of filter off that way. All right, well, moment of truth. Yeah, that's decently bitter. It's honestly not bad though. Considering this is just Malört and vodka, could be a lot worse. It actually is pretty reminiscent of Malört, but now it's, I guess, a good time to compare this to the actual Malört. Bottoms up. Okay, so by comparison, the Malört that I made that was 4 grams is already more bitter than I would say this stuff. And another thing in here is definitely there's a lot more herbal flavor, but also there's sugar. This Malört is actually a little bit sweeter. Now, I am a scientist and I will forever die curious if I don't know how much more bitter these other strengths are. I may as well just try these other ones as well. I may regret that decision, but I don't know, let's give it a shot. All right, so here I now have the 8 gram of Wormwood. It smells a lot more intense. It kind of smells like when you open a paint can, kind of smells like that. I don't know if that's a good sign or not, but let's see how good this 8 gram of Wormwood one is. Oh, that is extremely bitter. So in terms of bitterness, this kind of tastes like grapefruit. It's on the level of bitterness of grapefruit. The 4 gram might be like a bitter grapefruit. This is almost painful. Ugh. Now that being said, I may as well finish this punishment and actually end with 16 grams. I'm a little bit hesitant about this one, but I suffer for you guys. Again, it's got that like paint can smell. All right, time for the 16 grams. I'm not looking forward to this one. Oh, something happens when you add more Wormwood. The bitterness is overwhelming. It hits you like a second after you taste it. There's a flavor that's kind of similar to like bad hot sauce. I don't know how else to describe that. If you ever had a hot sauce that's just like made from capsaicin extract as opposed to real peppers, and it's made in like a plastic bottle, and that plastic bottle has like sat in the sun and then basically like aged over time, it's kind of got that flavor. We know now, at least for the level of Wormwood that we need, that 4 grams is pretty good, which is great because that's what I used for the other 2. So let's compare the 4 gram of Wormwood one to the ones that have the additional herbs in them. So first, I'm gonna actually try the one that I made that has the extra herbs. Honestly, it smells a lot better. All right, cheers. It's pretty good. Yeah, mine's a little spicy for some reason, but otherwise it tastes pretty good. And I'm just now gonna once again compare this to just the plain 4 grams of Wormwood one. Oh yeah, it's a night and day difference. The one that has the extra herbs tastes a lot better. This one doesn't taste bad. Like I would actually drink this, but the one with the extra stuff actually does help add to the flavor. I can still kind of mentally remember what the first one tasted like, so let's just compare it to the commercial Malört again. It's pretty good, honestly. I mean, maybe it's just because my taste buds are completely burned out in comparison to all the other crap I've been drinking. But I think Malört gets a bad rap for no reason. There's definitely a lot of similarity. There's something extra in the version that I made, this traditional recipe version, which I think might be the allspice. The allspice might be adding an extra little bit of spiciness to this that the Malört doesn't have. Now, that being said, I don't think it's a bad thing. So if you are actually interested in making Malört yourself, this might be the recipe to actually go with. I'm gonna do one last thing is I am gonna add some sugar to this and see if this improves the flavor and makes it closer to Malört. But before I do that, I'm just gonna quickly taste my vibes-based one. It smells pretty good. Orange blossom definitely comes through. So let me just taste this. Cheers. Honestly, this is pretty good. It kind of reminds me of Fernet, which I like Fernet. So yeah, I don't know. If you like Fernet, maybe this is the recipe to kind of go with. Okay, so now I've gone through this whole experiment and now it's time to really lock down the final Malört recipe. And so to do that, I'm going to actually add a little bit of sugar to the traditional version to see if this actually ends up making something that tastes very similar to Malört. And so to do this, I'm going to actually make a simple syrup, which is going to do 2 things. First, it's going to water it down a smidgen, which is probably a good idea. And then also it's gonna add a little bit of sweetness. And to do this, I'm just gonna add equal parts water to equal parts sugar. Just give this a mix. I added hot water, so I'm gonna let this cool down. All right, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of the traditional Malört. So I've got about this much. I'm gonna finalize the recipe in the end, don't worry. And then I've got my simple syrup here. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of simple syrup to this. Wow, that's pretty good. I would say it's very similar. Again, there is an element of spiciness. So if you want to make something that ends up tasting a little bit like the Malört you get in the store, don't add the allspice. However, I do think it really adds to it and gives it another little bit of an interesting flavor, adding a little bit of spiciness to it. That being said, it's your Malört. You can do what you want. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna do some fine tuning, behind the scenes, not filming. I'm gonna post the final recipe right here. All right,
That's how you make Malört. And lastly, I just want to say, feel free to tune this. If you decide to make this to yourself, then you can make it stronger, less bitter, spicy, not, sweet, not, and it's completely up to you. Thank you for watching, and yeah.